Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in to another live stream. I'm Lee, and I'm going to be bringing on a series of guests to talk about anything and everything from tech to non-tech, from Next.js to design systems, anything and everything. And today, I'm super excited to talk about the future of the front end, how designers work, how developers work, and some of the really exciting things in this space. So today, really excited to announce Pedro Duarte, who is an incredible developer, designer, and really just a big contributor to the front-end ecosystem. I actually first saw Pedro's work in the Jamstack space, and then with the product modules, which we'll talk a little bit about more. Another fun thing, he has a really cool personal site too, so go check that out. It uses Next.js and Vercel. It's got a really great design. So please give a warm welcome in the chat and introduce Pedro. How's it going? Let me unmute you here. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you for having me.
Super excited to talk about the future of the front end because partially I identify myself as a front end engineer. I really truly believe that at heart. That's how I got started. That's how I progressed throughout my career. And I have a certain affinity for the front end. So it's always fun for me to talk about everything, design systems, components, React, Figma, all that stuff. I love talking about that stuff. And I'm really excited to talk to you today because you've done a lot of things in this space and you have a lot of experience. And I think people are really interested to hear about some of the things you're talking about today. So maybe just for people tuning in who want to learn a little bit more about you, you want to give just like a quick bio or a quick background?
Sure, yeah. So well, thanks for the intro, first of all. I'm a front-end dev. I've primarily focused on UI since I started, usually working very closely with designers and doing the front end and trying to sort of like bridge that gap. I was usually that person. And then I worked in different places, advertising, then fintech, and then editorial, and then finally I'm joined Modules, which is the first startup I've worked at. That was about 2 years ago, actually, 2 years ago next month. And at Modules, I'm working with Colin, Steve, and the founders and the rest of the team on closing that gap that I essentially feel like I've been trying to close with designers forever.
I've described it as like Modules feels like Figma pretty much, but for React components. Like, is that how you pitch it to people?
Yeah, you could say that. I mean, now Modules is both a free-form design tool like Figma. You can draw boxes and you can put shapes on top of shapes and say that that's your design. But you can also do real kind of code with Modules in a visual way, using React components, at least for now. And even using external libraries. For example, a lot of the components that you have access to in Modules would be using Radix, which is one of our libraries of accessible low-level components. And that's where I'm at, and it's great, and happy to show you some stuff, man.
Nice. So maybe for some of the people tuning in who aren't as familiar with the front-end space or the design system space, I think one thing that's super interesting to me is the nuances and the difficulties that go into making these components not only perform well across browsers, but be accessible, be performant, and have a consistent and easy to use API. Could you maybe shed some light just on all the things that you feel like go into making those components great? Because now you've been involved not only at the component level, at the library level, at the visual interface level. Like, there's so many things that people don't realize.
It's a lot to take in, to be honest. I always say the hardest component you can make is a button. It's so difficult to make a good button.
You just make it an A tag, right?
Exactly. But it's everything you said. You've got API decisions to make. If you're building a design system, right, you've got a lot of API decisions to make. How can the consumers of your design system use that button? How many buttons do they have? How many sizes? How many colors? Also known as variants. Can you combine variants? can you render a button as a link if you actually want to? And if you do that, can you add href without TypeScript shouting in your face? That's polymorphism, essentially.
Yeah.
And then for accessibility, yes, I would say the button is not really the biggest problem with accessibility, but it is a massive problem in a lot of other components that may otherwise look very simple on the surface, like a tooltip. That's the perfect example. Everybody can do a tooltip with CSS pseudo elements in, like, I don't know, 5 minutes, right? But it's not accessible. So when it comes to defining accessibility, API, and usage of certain components, that's when you start entering a much more complex area. And essentially with modules, we are working on solving all of those issues, even educating people when you should use a tooltip versus a popover. Because under the hood, they have very similar mechanics in terms of positioning. It's something that you want to appear based on a user's interaction, whether the interaction is a hover or a click. You want to show more content. And you see often the tooltips are misused, popovers are misused, dialogues, nested dialogues.
Oh no.
The list goes on.
You just broke my heart when you said that. Like a modal or a dialogue inside of a modal, like a UI designer cries every time they see that. We've all seen it. Oh, it's so funny too, because I think people don't appreciate the difficulty with something like a tooltip too. But then when you get into that API design, like you're talking about, I think, we often joke as programmers, like one of the hardest things is naming things. It's really hard to come up with good, consistent names for how you interface with that component, like what the API is for the front end. And I think it's even more paramount, more so when you're making this design system that's supposed to be consumed by your entire company or multiple companies, like an open source project. And, in the front end space, there's so many different words, like buzzwords for naming things, components, atoms, modules. Like, what are all these words? How do they relate? So much so that even for CSS, for like class names, right? We had to make whole conventions for this. We had BEM just to describe how we were going to do these naming patterns. And part of the thing that's really appealing to me is when we're leaning on tools like modules, we're leaning on open source libraries that help give you the proper guidance for things like naming, and they solve the API for you. They give you the accessibility guidelines. It reduces that mental, I don't know, like the mental overload as a front-end developer when you're like, I just want to build this website. Like, I don't want to have to worry about all this crap. You know what I mean?
100%. Yeah.
Yeah. I think one of the things that's really cool, maybe you just want to give a quick like sentence overview of what is radix and what is stitches, and kind of how do those two things relate to what you work on with modules?
Okay, let's start with radix. So as we said before, modules is a visual design editor, right? You can build prototypes, you can just design something and show to a client and throw it away, or you can actually take that design and make it a fully functioning page. In order to do that, we will give you some pre-built components that are completely unstyled. And your job is to style them, right? Your job is not to decide how a popover should be positioned, because that should be something that complies to certain accessibility guidelines, or it's heavily tested in, I don't know, different browsers, different devices. It's the type of stuff that usually as a designer, even as a developer, you don't want to do. You just want something that works. You want to spend time thinking about how it looks, thinking about where it sits on the page. Right? I mean, if people want to build it, go ahead. It took us like 3 months just to build one select,
Yeah.
So radix is the that layer, is the layer that provides all of those unstyled, accessible, customizable components. And the goal is that they can be used within modules, and that's how it all started. But what happened was, we wrote an article about the radix select, and everybody was like, man, why is this only available in modules? Can we make it open source? Everybody wanted the open source. And finally, we decided to open source all of the primitives. So now they can also be used by anyone. Currently, anyone, I mean, anyone using React, because currently they're in React only, currently. So now it also means that if you want to build your design system and you want to have a tooltip or a popover, you can just take the popover and tooltip from Radix and you can add your styles onto it. And you can do that however you like. It's very similar to, in terms of styling, it's very similar to Reach UI. There are other libraries that do the same thing. Reach UI does a React Aria from Adobe is doing something similar, but with hooks. React is doing similar with hooks. So that's what we do. The difference is, well, I'm not going to say the difference, but our focus is that this is part of our product, right? It's not a side project, or it's not just an experiment. We have a dedicated team, which is an amazing team. Shout out to the Primitives team, Benno and Jenna, who are working on this every day, thinking about APIs, testing accessibility, testing performance. So that's Radix. Radix is the base of your design system, or even if you're not building a design system, you're just building an e-commerce site and you want a good popover or drop-down menu. And Stitches is a styling solution. It's a modern styling solution, let me say. The goal is not to support IE11. The goal is not to be, support legacy browsers. It's to think ahead. Stitches was designed from the ground up, thinking about where is CSS going. I'm not even talking about Sass or any other libraries, just CSS, because that is evolving a lot. And maybe we'll get to a point that we don't need any layers on top of CSS. CSS will be good enough. Stitches is built with that in mind. And it's built with other concerns in mind that helps you as a designer or developer build a better API for your design system. And you can use them together, because one is just a low-level unstyled set of components, and the other one is a styling solution. So naturally, you can take the styling solution and apply it to the unstyled components, and you've got a pretty good system going on.
So if we zoom out a little, something that's really interesting to me is the parallels between component libraries and where they've headed, and just the front-end ecosystem in general. And what I mean by that is, if you think about how the front end has evolved, you have decoupled architecture. Like, you went from monolithic apps to more, whether your UI is in React or Vue, or, you have your React layer, you have your API, you have some markup, Jamstack. You're decoupling what used to be a very large monolithic application into smaller pieces where there's, more responsibility over each one of those owners to own their piece. And if we think about that, even in the component library space too, I feel like now I see more and more of headless libraries outside of just the styling solution. And I almost feel like all of this comes from a maturity and a growth in the ecosystem of, like, people getting burnt on one regard and realizing some of the trade-offs, and then be like, okay, like, that's why we're going to build it this way. Like, for the decoupled front end, like, we know the benefits of something like a React, but then I think people are starting to learn more the benefits of breaking apart the logic layer of the component and the styling layer of the component. Because I think people have been maybe burnt, or they've just been frustrated with changing between CSS or Sass or CSS-in-JS, and they're seeing the value in having those primitives that can work with whatever styling solution they want. And I think that's something that Radix does pretty well. Like, do you agree with that trend I feel like I've seen?
I agree with that trend. I think it's a trend that it's the one that keeps on giving, right? Like, it happens, and then in 5 years, it's going to happen again and again. Like, right now, people they love Jamstack, and Jamstack is, a lot of people say it's something that's already existed technically, right? Like, it was the first thing. Radix was designed that you can use with CSS, with Sass, with CSS modules, with Tailwind, with style components. It's better with Stitches though, but it works with everything.
One thing that I'm curious your thoughts on, because I don't think a lot of people understand this. I don't think I understand it very well. So when CSS and JS libraries got popular, it was an attractive solution because, in my opinion, one, it allowed you to build design systems easier than you'd ever had before. Like bundling and distributing CSS was kind of hard before CSS and JS. I think that made that part easier. But then I think now in 2021, and as we've grown, you see people talking about zero runtime CSS and JS libraries and why that's important. So maybe for the people who don't understand that, could you maybe give like an idea of why that's important and why trying to have near zero runtime or as little JS as possible is good for your styling solution?
Definitely. It's tricky because sometimes there is a new API or there's a new library that does something cool and it gets a lot of traction and then it goes viral. And it's very hard to undo that. CSS in JS is always going to be one of those things that there will be people who love it and people who hate it. I really don't like to pick sides because right now I work on a CSS and JS library, and I really like it. I've always liked it, but I also really like CSS. I'm really happy to just use static CSS as well. What I like about CSS and JS is I like um, I like having access to CSS in JavaScript when I'm writing already HTML in JavaScript, being React. Um, and I feel like I can access some of the logic of my components and update the styling quite easily. Otherwise, you always have to do the logic in the template, add a new class to go to your CSS file, create that declaration, blah, blah, blah. I feel like it's harder to maintain as the app scales. I have the experience working with CSS and JS that it's easier to scale up, especially, not just saying that because we're working on stitches, but especially with stitches, and I can show you why later, which is about type safety in CSS and JS. It's very easy for you to misspell a variant on a page that forgot password page. You misspell the variant of a button and it's confusing, and nobody will see. And currently, nobody can tell you that you misspelled that variant. It's just going to be there. It's going to be the wrong styles. So I think this is the next evolution as well of relying on JS to improve the authoring experience of CSS. The problem, though, is that when you do runtime, you are essentially executing a lot of functions every time your component is rendering. So if you have a component that renders a lot, you're going to have 100% you're going to have performance issues there. We know that because modules is a design tool, and there are a lot of things that you do that we need to re-render the canvas, right? Say you are changing the color. You have a color picker and you're dragging that color picker and your color needs to change. We're talking like thousands of re-renderings a second. You can't do that if you're relying on runtime CSS and JS, especially with prop interpolation. Say that you pass a prop and then emotional style components or any other library that relies on prop interpolation will call that function, take the prop, take the value, generate the CSS, add it to your page. There's a lot going on. So, of course, one way is to just add inline style. Just use the style tag. Just bypass the whole prop interpolation, bypass CSS and JS, go old school, man. Just go style.
Oh, yeah.
So, that the problem that I have with the runtime is that it definitely is worse for performance. For a lot of people, it's not going to be a problem. If you're building a portfolio, it's not going to be a problem. That's fine. There are millions of websites built on that, and it's also fine. But hopefully, we can just be aware of the pros and cons. And and sometimes if you're using a big styling library just to do a one-page site, you're probably going to get 17 to 20 kilobytes of logic to build CSS and JS that you could just write a style.css, link it to in your head, and that you're done. So I think you have to be aware of what are the benefits you get versus what you're trying to do, and you have to weigh that balance. Also, if you also need to load 17 kilobytes for your portfolio and you have like 50 views a month, it's probably not a problem as well. I'm more on this side, you know, like I try not to over optimize. If people who follow me, they know how I am. I just don't like over abstracting or, you know, over engineering or all of this stuff. Just I like to try and be as easy and as simple as possible and just do it when I see that there is a reason to do something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
So
you've talked a little bit about under engineering before. Is that kind of in a similar vein to you, like trying to
yeah,
not over abstract things or not try to over componentize things?
I just do that all the time. I think it's just how my brain works. I can't think otherwise. If I start abstracting things, I just lose track and I just don't like it. Like people that have worked closely with me, they know. But I think there is a good side about that, which usually when you're abstracting stuff, it makes you sometimes might make you feel quite I don't know, quite proud, right? You create a function that does this and you reduce that into this
Mhm.
and it's
Oh yeah,
cool.
I've been there.
But in the long run, it's not a good idea, you know. And if you just have like a 100 file line, and every file is like very easy to read and understand, and anybody that joins your team can go and make a change. This is all part of maintenance, right? It's all part of like building a maintainable system. So anyway, that was a big pivot, but just wanted to say that.
And Stitches is it near zero runtime or zero, or it's close, right? I'm not sure exactly.
It's near zero.
Okay.
Okay, and Stitches beta is a bit better than
Mm,
the alpha version.
nice.
The thing is, it's still a CSS-in-JS library,
Hmm.
and because you technically have access to change CSS in your render, that's something that
Hmm.
you have access to do. If you do that, if you decide to change the color property based on a prop that your React component receives, it will cause runtime cost. It
Hmm.
has to, because you're relying on something that you don't know what it's going to be. You cannot write the CSS beforehand. But Stitches could and will be a true zero runtime library, um, with some give and take, you know, like
Hmm.
if you want to be true zero runtime, you can't change CSS based on a prop. Like you
Yeah.
can, but you probably have to do it in a different way. Maybe you have
CSS
to
pairs.
exactly use the style tag, or maybe just add a new class and then you generate that class like as you would in normal CSS. But that cost that you get is very little.
Mm-hmm.
And Jonathan Neo, I don't know if you have heard of Jonathan. He was hired about 3 months ago. He joined modules to work on Stitches, to really work on the beta version of Stitches. But Jonathan is not just like any developer. He is the dude, man. Like he's like a contributor of post CSS. I think he has like over 500 post CSS plugins.
Oh
He
wow.
knows everything about CSS. He knows CSS inside out. There could be no better person to work on it, and so we're working closely, and we've got big visions about how Stitches can truly eventually just be even just a static extraction tool where it goes through your app, it takes all of the CSS, and it will just give you a style.css that you can put in your public folder in Next.js, let's say.
Do you want to do a quick demo? Show
Of
the people
Stitches,
yeah, Stitches or Radix or
can do
whatever.
whatever, man. I think Stitch is a bit more fun. There's more to show, but Radix is very powerful. Maybe you can show Radix what you guys have done, and
Yeah,
then I can
yeah.
do a demo of Stitches.
Let's start with Stitches.
All right.
I'll if you share your screen, I'll throw that up on here, and then we can talk a little bit about actually how Vercel is going to be using some of Radix, which is pretty cool.
Okay, cool. All right, let's do it. I'll share my screen then. So let me know when you can see.
All right. Perfect. Looks great.
Okay, let me think. Demos are always tricky, right? Especially when you're still recovering from a virus.
Yeah.
But let me do this. Let me ask you something. How do you feel about, we're just talking about how buttons are so complex, right?
Mm-hmm.
Shall I think I'm just going to do a demo of building a button in Stitches. How about that?
That'd be perfect.
All right, let's do that. I'm just going to install Stitches here in Code Sandbox.
I love a Code Sandbox.
And as you can see here, we've got many versions. These three here are still in alpha. These are all the Canary beta releases. So we go to the latest one. Sweet. Let's remove the CSS. We don't need it.
We got a better solution coming.
All All right, let's do this. Let's start off very simple, okay? Let's import styled from stitches. And let's just say title equals styled. And that's going to be a H1. And we just say color red. Okay.
Got
We
it.
take the title and we put it here.
Okay. So I've used styled components before. Like it's familiar to me. I see what you're working with.
So far, it's like, I would say it's like 99% exactly the same as every other styled API that was popularized by style components. So emotion will be very similar. So far, so good, right? All right, cool. But let's go back a step. Let's just say hello world. And I'm just going to create a box because I'm a big fan of creating like box primitives. And I'm just going to put the box here. And you can't tell any difference because it just says hello world. So I just want to add a little bit of space because I feel like everything is a bit tight there. So I'm just going to use this special prop that we get given. And I'm just going to add some margin because margin is always a good property to add when you are dealing at the layout level. So usually we don't really add margins to components, but when you're dealing with layout, it's a good one to use. So I like to use margin.
I told you I had this ready.
Love it. So the first thing that you see is that you get access to this CSS prop, right?
Yeah.
That's it. We got an empty div. It's a box. We can use box everywhere that we want instead of a div. But the beauty of it is that if you just don't know what you don't want, like you don't know how you want to name a component, but you just know you want to add some color, you can just do all that in line. Okay. The difference between that and doing something inline using the style tag is that here you can also basically do anything that you can do with CSS. So if you want to change the color to black on hover, then we can change the color, right? Nice. This is what happens so far under the hood. Zoom in a little bit. Zoom in here a little bit. Let's take this one. Stitches gives us a base class.
You want to zoom in a little more on DevTools?
Yeah. Let me know when it's good.
You're good there.
Yeah. Gives us this base hash. And this and also gives us, this is always going to exist for every time you call like a style component. That's the base class for that. But then it gives us a little hint here. It says, okay, there is also something else going on. And this is some CSS. That means that for a developer, when you're debugging, I'm going to talk a lot about debugging experience, which is not a term that's commonly used. But the debugging experience here gives the developers a hint that there's some inline CSS going on. And this is what's happening. Right? There's some margin and there's some color red. Cool. All right. We can remove this. We can remove this. Let's just leave 20, a little bit of breathing room. That's cool. All right. Now that we got that out of the way, we can start with our button. I'm going to try and be quick. And I'm just going to do the most basic button I can think of that still looks half decent. So let's do appearance none, border none, font size 13 pixels, line height 1. Get out. Let's do height 25 pixels. And border radius, I want it to look like a pill. So we do a very large border radius. That's okay. And a little bit of padding left of 10 pixels and a little bit of padding. Cool. Let's put this button in.
Is the really large pixel value for border radius like doing like 50% where it's like completely rounded, or is that interesting? So that's more of like a pill value. Okay.
This is something I always use, and we use it a lot in our design system. Column also, who's a really good CSS dev, always is. I think with 50%, you always have a bit of problem depending on the aspect ratio. You know, whereas this is always the real value that you would put here would be this, the height divided by 2. But then later, if you change the height, you have to remember to change this. So I'll just put 9999 pixels. I'm happy with this.
Nice. Learn something new every day.
So anyway, so now we just got a button. So far, so good. And if we look in DevTools, we just have that one class, and this is all our styles. Okay, sweet. All right. And here again, we can do hover, and let's change the background color to, what did you say?
50% will cause ellipses.
It would, yeah.
Yeah, that's a good call. I didn't even think about that.
All right, and we also have here background color of, let's go with games now. Okay, cool. Now when I hover, there's a slight change of background color. That's nice and subtle. I like that. Probably not very accessible, but we go with this for now. All right, cool. So in as basic as it gets, we've done our button, right? So far, like I was saying, oh man, button is so complex and all this, but it doesn't look like it. What happens is, I don't want just a gray button. Actually, I want two buttons. I want a gray button and I want a purple button. So, what would you do? You could do this. You could do const purple button.
Extend pattern.
Yeah, you can then call the button, and then you can say background color, blue, violet, and then you can take purple button. Boom, purple button.
Nice. Yeah, I've done that before.
Yeah, this is common, right? A lot of people can do this. And now I actually want like a large button, right? Cool. I'll take the button. You get the idea. And I will just change the font size and the padding and the height, and that's going to be a large button. What happens when I want a purple button and I want a large button? We're going to start having... We're going to get into trouble here when it comes to scaling this button. Yep. So let's not do this, actually. Let's just change this back to button. And instead, let's create a variant. And we're going to create a variant just called variant. We use a special key called variance with an S. And we call it a variant. And I want something called purple. And here I want background color, blue, violet. And on hover, I want background color, dark violet. Cool, we've created the variant, we've authored the variant, but we haven't applied it yet. So how do we apply a variant? Well, we've given it a name, it's called variant, and we've given it a value, it's called purple. So when you start using your component, as you start typing, you already see I get a variant prop showing up. And the moment I open this up, you see I get a purple showing up.
Nice.
So we've now got a purple button using variants. And I can change this to purple button.
Love the autocomplete.
The autocomplete is game changing. We'll see. Let me just do one thing. Let me just, now that we've got two buttons, let me just make this flex wrap. Let's wrap this. And let's put a gap of 20 pixels.
Another cool thing to highlight too, I think, is in doing that CSS prop, you didn't have to name that box. You didn't have to name it container wrapper, whatever.
Yes.
I was just talking about this earlier today, where it's so nice to forget about naming some of those things when all you need to do is just do a flex wrapper.
Exactly. This is a perfect use, in my opinion, for CSS. It's just layout. You just want to do this here. In this case, there's no logic to it. That's just what you want to do. So that's awesome, and we've created a variant called purple. We've updated the styles and we've applied it. What's happening now? What happens is, you see the first button just has the base class, and the second button has the base class plus a new class. And this class is also constructed in a debugging experience, with debugging experience in mind, meaning you create the hash that we can't read, but you will give us a hint, which is human readable, meaning when you're inspecting your app, you know that this is using a variant purple. It's not a surprise.
That's nice.
This is good because also, say you have a size 1, size 2, and you're not really sure what size you want to use, you can use DevTools to just toggle it on and off, and you can start designing in the browser a little bit, just because we have hints. It's a basic thing, but allows people to do this, right? Cool. One thing I find weird though is that I've got a variant for purple and I don't have a variant for gray. I don't like that. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to code is gray, and I'm going to take this here. I'll put that there. Here. All right, and now, because I've removed the gray, I'm going to do background color transparent. So essentially, the first 3 lines is a mini reset. Let's just say mini reset, because I like to have my resets scoped. I don't like global resets. So as you can see, what's happened now is we've got a gray variant and a purple variant, but this one doesn't look gray because we're not applying it. So we solve this by, again, going variants. And when I open this up, we get gray and purple. Cool, I want gray. And that's cool. But I still don't want to have to specify gray here. I want my button to be gray by default, but I still want to organize it as a variant because I'm organized. We can do that by going here after the variance object and use this special key called default variance. And when we want our variant to be gray. So there we have it. Now the default button is gray, or you can specifically tell it it's gray, or you can make it purple. And the purple we can also make, just to make it look a little bit nicer, let's make color white. Cool. All right. So far, so good, right? Everything making sense so far?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Let's do one thing here. While we're talking about variants, and also just to continue with the complexity of buttons, there's another thing that I want, which is I want a different type of button. I want a button that doesn't have a background color. It just has an outline. So I'm going to create a new variant over here. And I'm going to call it outlined with a D. And its value is going to be true. And this is what we call a Boolean variant. It's a variant that can just be true or false or true. It's not, you don't have a list of options that you can choose from. So we're going to create this Boolean variant true. And what we're going to do is, we know that in this case, background color, transparent, because we don't want any.
Yeah.
And we want a 1 pixel ring, right? So border 1 pixel solid. And I'm going to leave it without a color because by default, it's going to use current color.
Oh, no way.
And that's okay. We'll do that. All right. Let's take the gray button first. And let's say outlined. Gray, outline, gray button. And now if we start typing, we should see outlined. Here it is, outlined. Okay, good. It's outlined. The outline is black. And the reason the outline is black is because that's the default color, right? And because border 1 pixel solid inherits current color, it means the border is black. I don't want that. What I want to be able to tell Stitches that when my button is gray and outlined, do this. This is what I want to do.
Yeah. It's like the anding of situations that causes pain in the past. And like you said, it leads to that code duplication, right?
Exactly. And also it leaves you sometimes with not knowing where each style belongs. It's harder to reason about. But with this, I think we are solving this problem in a really cool way. And this API is still kind of work in progress, but it's working. It's working really well to demo. So we have something called compound variants. This is an array. And here you take a pairing of the variant that we want, which is gray, and another variant that we want, which is outlined, true, and the CSS we want to pass in.
Oh, wow.
Right? This is very declarative. We're just saying when it's gray, when it's outlined, what do I want to do? I want to change the border color to light gray. There you go. As you can see, we now have a gray outline, right? We're going to do the same for purple. We want to go here. I'm going to say when my button is purple. Already, see, the button's not even showing up. It's actually there, but it's not showing up because by default, the color is white. So you can't even see it. So what we're going to do is Let's take this. It's about the same. Here, this becomes purple. And the border color becomes blue violet.
Oh man.
And the color becomes blue violet as well. There you go. We're getting there. We're getting close.
So amazing. So just a little context too. I have built a complete component library with style components, and I had to build the button component, and you had to do all these things manually, and it was a lot of work. And this
It's a lot of work.
I think you really crushed it with this API, the team behind this, because you've done such a good job of simplifying it down to something that I can understand, having not worked with this code before, and it solves all of these complex use cases.
Yeah, I think it's this declarative approach and way of organizing, and also the type save to all of these things is going to make a big difference in how people author CSS. But what's beautiful about this is that it's just normal CSS. It's nearly as if what you would do if you were writing it by hand. It's just that you wouldn't write this crazy hash. But apart from that, if you're following a BEM convention or something, you basically do something like this. Anyway, let's just quickly finish this up. I'll show you a few more things. Here, we're just going to change the color on hover because when it's outlined, we already changed the color when it's purple, so we need to make a few adjustments. When it's outlined, we want the color to be white. And the reason we do that is because over here, we set it back to blue violet. So now, and it's cool because everything lives in the same place. You see, it's like, whatever I do here affects my hover, I put it right here. It's all together. It's easy to maintain. So there we go. We have now 4 possible buttons with two different colors and 2 different, appearances or whatever you want to call it. This is the outlined one. But I don't like using border, man. It bothers me. I want to use box shadow, I want to be able to do 0, 0, 0, 1 pixel, and then the color. I like box shadow. It doesn't mess around with my layout.
Yeah.
But the problem, right?
A lot of people don't realize that until you're trying to change border radiuses, like when something's selected and it has a thicker border radius, and then your layout is shifting around. And I think a lot of people don't realize then you got to go to the box shadow.
Yeah, absolutely. But box shadow doesn't give you a shorthand. Well, is it a longhand? It's a longhand, right? I was getting confused.
It's a long
it's a longhand. It's a longhand.
Yeah, longhand.
Doesn't give you a longhand to change the color like border does. So we'll solve that. We'll solve that with something called locally scoped tokens. And we're going to call this shadow color, and we're going to say that it's transparent by default. Okay. We take the shadow color. It starts with 2 $signs. This is the syntax for a locally scoped token. You can think of it very much in the same way as you would as a CSS custom property. Okay. Instead of double dash, double $sign. Easy. $sign for stitches. So what we've done here, we've created the box shadow. We've defined the box shadow config, the spread, the offset, the blur. This is the important thing. And we've decided that the color is transparent. So now all we have to do is replace border color here and here with shadow color. And now we have it. So now we can actually use locally scoped tokens as a way to update just part of your CSS. This is a cool technique that you can use in CSS in any language. It's not specific to stitches. What is specific to stitches is the ability to create these properties and use them in a pretty first-class approach, right?
Yeah.
All right. So this is cool. So far, you enjoying the demo?
But can we go further?
All right, we can go further. We can go a little bit further.
Blow my mind here. This is awesome.
Everything we've done so far is just using the styled function from NPM. We just took styles from Stitches React. And the thing that's bothering me now is I've got Gainsborough light gray, blue violet, dark violet. I've got this all over my button. I'm just repeating these colors everywhere. And I don't want to do that. So we're going to change this. We're going to rename this to Create CSS. And here, we're going to call it And this function is going to give us back a styled function. But
Oh,
this
wow.
styled function is different. This one has access to a built-in theme. And in this built-in theme, what you can do is you can start creating your tokens, your design system tokens, your variables, whatever you want to call them. You can create it here. We call it just your default theme. So we'll create grade 400, and that was Gainsborough, and grade 500, and that was light gray, purple, oops, too fast, 400, violet, and purple, 500, dark violet. Okay, we've just created them. We haven't used them, but we are going to, and we can use them like this. Where we use previously just a CSS color value, we just start with a $sign, and this is just a $1 because if you look here for the locally scoped tokens, we use 2, right? And for here we use 1. So we have a theme, we have colors. This is the scale, and this is the tokens. So let's go back here. We go $sign, and there you go. Gray 400, gray 500, purple. So we go with gray 400. And for light gray, we want gray 500.
Oh, that's awesome.
And for blue violet, we want purple 400. And on hover, we want purple 500. You get the idea. I'm not going to do white and black because we don't need to.
Yeah.
This is just a variant name. We don't need to change that. Light gray. This is interesting. So this is the compound variant for this ring, right? Light gray. If I put red, you see it becomes red. So naturally, if you think you can put gray 400 here, nothing happens. Tell you why nothing happens. Because based on the scales that we have defined, colors, space, font sizes, we are able to use common sense to map the scales to certain CSS properties. And this is heavily inspired by System UI. That means that when you want to change the background color, we know that 99% of the times, 100% of the time, you're going to want something from your color scale. So you just go gray 400. It knows it's the color scale, right? But when you're talking about a token, this is just a token, right? It's too abstract. We don't know where you want to get your token from. And you can have tokens in multiple scales that have the same name, like primary. So that's why we have a feature called scale prefix tokens. And all you do, you put the name of the scale before the name of the token. And you can use that anywhere, in any property, anywhere inside calc functions, color functions, whatever you want to do. That always works. So for variables, we're going to be a little bit more specific, and we're going to prefix that. And okay, let's finish this off. Colors and purple 400. 400, and that's it. We're good. All right, cool. We're now using tokens, and if we look again, what's happening under the hood? All the classes.
You're blowing people's minds, by the way. People are very excited about this.
I'm glad. It's all the same. The classes are all the same, but the moment that we picked the styled function from create CSS and we added a theme, this is what we get. Your theme automatically becomes CSS custom properties.
Nice.
And this is important. We'll touch base on why this is so powerful in a minute. And from then on, it's just references to your custom properties, but in a way that's much easier for you to manage, especially because we have type safety. If you put, it tells you the tokens you have available for you and all of these things. So the same thing we did here. I'm going to show you a few more things. Let's add some space. We're just going to use numeric keys for these ones, 10 and 20. And so we can do here, where we say padding left and padding right, we can do $1, that's 10. And over here, where we have gap, we can do $2, and that's 20.
You could prefix that with space if you wanted to, right?
Sorry?
Could you, and then do you prefix that if you want with like $space if you want it to be scoped?
You could, but you don't need to, because by default, the gap property already looks into the space scale.
Oh yeah, true.
Yeah. And here is the same. Instead of 20, we can put 2. So now we're back. We've done the color. But there's one more thing, which I think is annoying, which is I don't like to go padding left and padding right. I just want to do padding X. And I want to do padding X of 1.
Nice.
I can't, because CSS doesn't have that property.
Yeah.
So we're going to create it. We're going to go here. We're going to use the utils. We're going to create a property called padding X. We receive the config in case we need. We receive the value, that's the value being passed in. And we return what we want to return, which is padding left of the value and padding right of the value. There we go. So now we have padding X. We can use tokens. You can put any value in.
And that's interesting to me too, because I've seen other libraries take the approach where they include all of those utilities as part of the framework, but there is an elegance to explicitly defining those and having that API to provide whatever you want, because you might want some other kind of weird one that's not supported by default, and being able to extend that easily is pretty nice.
Yeah, absolutely. We don't really ship anything by default. There's no default theme. There's no default breakpoints. There's nothing. As you saw up until now, we're just using the style function directly from the package.
That's awesome.
So that's cool, right? We've got our own property. If you want to use like short names like PX, you can call this PX, and it still works. So that's cool. That's cool. That's cool. I've got 2 more things I want to show you. I think people are gonna like seeing this. I hope, and I think it'll be interesting to show. Let's do this. One thing we haven't talked about is how we can deal with some responsive stuff, right? Like, I don't know, say that you have a button and above a certain breakpoint, you just want that button to be bigger, right? So we can do this. We can create conditions. Let me rely on autocomplete here, just in case. And I'm just going to create something called breakpoint 1, which is going to be media, min width, and I might try 400 pixels. Because I'm zoomed in, I might have to tweak this. So we've created a condition, and a condition may seem like a bit of a weird word. Have you ever heard that word in CSS, conditions, like as an official term?
Not really, no.
So that's coming, right? This is all CSS terminology that's coming.
Yeah.
So that's what I said at the beginning. Stitches is very future thinking about CSS.
Like a future spec thing. That's nice.
Yeah. And as well as conditions, you get a property called when. Right? When, as you can already see, we get some autocompletes there. BP1, let's just increase the button a little bit. Let's say font size 15 pixels, height 35 pixels, and that's good. Let's just increase the height. There you go. Can you see? Boom.
Nice. And can you define those breakpoints globally?
Yes, these are defined, like in a way, these are global now, right?
Oh yeah, it's in your theme. Okay, yeah, nice.
Yeah, this is in the theme. The moment you put anything here, you can access it anywhere in a style object or in the CSS prop as well.
Nice.
Okay. You can also put when blocks inside variance. You can say specifically when the purple is above BP1, do this. Okay. But I don't like putting my breakpoints in here. I'm not a fan of putting responsive decisions inside a component. What I want to do, I just want to give people both options. You got 2 sizes to choose from, this size and this size. So very quickly, let's do this. We create a size variant, 1, 2, and in 1, we're going to say font size, height, and this is that one. And size 2 is this one. We can get rid of this. It's useful if you need it, but there's a better way. And as you can see, they all look a bit small now. And that's because we've removed the base styles. And pay attention that the more we refactor this button, the cleaner it gets, the less styles we have into this base area. Right?
Yeah, I liked what you talked about with like the mini reset. I think that's really, really smart.
Yeah. And then just to solve that problem, I say I just want the default to be 1. I want the default size to be 1. So now we're back, right? We can say default size 2 if we want, but we want 1. Okay. So now what we've done, it seems like a silly thing to do, but when you think about it, we've now exposed the decision of when to use size 1 and when to use size 2 to the consumers of your design system. It's not you who is making that decision. And you may have people that are using your design system to just build an iPhone, let's say just like a mobile experience. And you may have people that are actually building a responsive thing, or maybe they're building a dashboard that actually they want things to be small. They never want, like, modules doesn't really have a lot of breakpoints. It's a design tool, you know. So you've just now given that ability and that choice to the consumer, and that's what we want to do. So how do we then how do we use this? So what we can do is, what we're saying we want to do is this. We're saying we want a responsive button, right? Let's say responsive purple button. That's okay. I want a button that starts off big and then it goes small. So we know that we can apply variants like this, right? If you look at the responsive button, you see that it's growing. But how do we apply a variant that needs to change based on its condition? So it's quite simple. I think, at least I believe so, the API. You just pass an object and you have a prop called initial, and that's the prop that you want it to be first. Because by default we have size 1, I'm now setting initial to be 2. So now you can see it's size 2. But when it reaches BP1, I want it to go back to 1. So nice. now it's size 2, and now it's size 1. Size 2, size 1. And this is how you can responsibly apply variants rather than author your variants or your components responsibly. It's a big difference there. That's a very good feature. It's, especially when you were talking about API design. I think this is gonna help a lot of people to build better APIs. You like that?
Yeah, I do. It's funny because I've, like, the underlying pain point you talked about where you ship your responsive, like, media queries in the component CSS. I've made that mistake before where then the consumer says, actually, I want it to break here and I don't want it to break here. And then you're like, well, okay, now we have to do some kind of like hacky override or CSS. So that's nice.
And the cool thing is, if here you need to change your variants in a very specific or very whatever rule that you need to use to change a variant, you can just put it like this as well. You can go supports, say that you want to apply a specific variant if it supports like display grid or something like that, you know? You can put any valid rule, and then you can apply a variant whenever you want. Cool, that's cool. And the last thing I want to show you, I think I promise you this is the last thing, is theming. And theming is something that's very difficult to do usually. People are now, everybody trying to do dark themes and stuff, but in general, it's a bit tough. But with stitches, I think we have a nice way to do it. So let's take the theme function we get from create CSS. And let's go here and let's create a theme called new theme. New theme. I'm not going to make a dark theme here. We just call it a new theme. We're going to override the color scale. And what I want for this new theme, I just want to update my purples. I want the purple 400 to be something else. I want the purple 500 to be something else. This is the change I want to make. So I'm going to make my purples reds. Okay? And I'm going to take this new theme function that I just got back, and I'm going to apply it as a class name. Yeah. Okay. Now everything that was purple became red. And that's great. And this works because
CSS variables.
Absolutely.
Nice.
So
you gotta love that.
This is all it does. But it's a bit weird to have purple mapping to red. So you don't want to do that. We need to give people a better API. We need to give people the ability to create semantic tokens. We do that like this. If you go back to your theme, let's just add these. Oops. Let's just add these as red to our theme at the top. So now you've got colors, right? They're just colors. They don't have any semantic meanings. And we're going to create semantic tokens. We're going to have primary. And we want primary to be something in this case. And we're going to have primary, say we call it primary dark or something. I'm just making it up. So by default, everything was purple, right? I think I made a mistake somewhere. Let me go have a look. I'm just going to undo all this because at one point, I don't know what happens. Yeah, okay, perfect. Quick rewind. Red and red. Primary and primary dark.
Nice.
All right, cool. So by default, everything's purple. And we want it to be, we still want it to be purple, but we want to call it primary. So what we're going to do is first, we're just going to remove this. Everything's back to purple. And I want to be able to essentially use purple. So I could do this, right? But that just means duplicating our values again. And we know we don't want to do that. So you can just do it the same way you would do it in your styling. You can just use the color straight away. So primary is now purple 400. The last thing we need to do is that when we have a variant called purple, it becomes primary. Purple here, it's primary. Just primary. It becomes primary dark. Cool. Variant primary. This is primary. This is primary. Okay. And primary. And then primary.
It's nice that you can reference those variables, just the locally scoped tokens or whatever you call that, just being able to do $ primary. That's really
cool. Exactly. And I made a mistake somewhere. So let's see. What did I do? Primary here.
You're already doing a much better job live coding than I've ever done. So shout out. I would have failed much better.
Yeah. There's going to be something here. Just going to remove this just in case it's this theme. But it's not. Okay. 1 second. This was, this is supposed to be when it's primary and it's outlined. Let me think. You gonna help me debug this?
I can try.
Come on in. Let's go from the top.
Color in a compound variant.
Yeah, because this, even the first purple is not applying. Okay, that gives us a good hint. So primary is set to primary, and background color is set to primary dark, and the color is white. I think the problem is I'm not actually putting them properly. There we go. I was still adding a purple variant here, but we renamed this to primary.
Oh, so, yeah.
It's a bit confusing to look when it's so zoomed in. But anyway, we got everything primary now. We're back on track. We now have this semantic name. And now the cool thing is what we can do in our theme. Instead of doing something silly like changing purples to reds, we can now just reference red in primary. We can take new theme. We can add new theme. And there we go.
Nice.
And that's how you do theming with stitches.
That's amazing. I mean, like you basically explain the entire library in like 40 minutes. So that's insanely incredible.
Yeah, thanks. That's basically it. I mean, there's more. Like, there's a lot of stuff going on. There's a low-level API that it doesn't actually give you React components. It just gives you class names, and you can do everything we've just done just using class names.
That's awesome.
And so that can be for another day.
Well, one thing too that might be cool to show, we were talking about. I mean, thank you for that incredible demo of stitches.
Thank you, man.
That was awesome. You want to pull up that calendar that I was mentioning?
Yeah, definitely.
I think this is really cool. So we were talking about how Stitches is the styling solution, and then Radix gives you those unstyled accessible primitives. You want to pop the zoom probably like yeah, that's good. So one really cool thing we've been doing at Vercel is we needed a calendar component for a new page we're working on. And we were able to utilize the underlying primitives that Radix gives you for this calendar component to make a really, really nice accessible calendar. And this component's actually like very hard to get right because you want it on mobile, you want it to like pop up from the bottom, and you want to make sure it works with keyboards, it doesn't block the user's input. I mean, there's a ton of different things to consider here. And I was really impressed with how fast the team built this. They did an amazing job with this, being able to utilize something like Radix. So really, really cool stuff. And this is just using CSS modules, I think. So it can use whatever styling solution you want here, which is pretty incredible.
Yeah, this looks amazing. Like this really takes it to a new level, like it shows the power. Like when you have these low level components that take care of all this complexity for you, then you can literally just focus on this. Look how cool this calendar looks.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I love it. It's amazing. And Radix is here. If anyone is curious, radixui.com. It goes to an introduction. We basically cover everything I've said. And then you can start digging around, we show the features.
I'll try to leave a link to those too so people can check them out.
Yeah, definitely. And the examples that we have in our documentation is actually using Stitches. It will be a very similar API if you're using another CSS-in-JS library, but these ones are using Stitches. And these are some basic examples. This is all you would take to do a drop-down menu with keyboard accessibility, type ahead, lookup, focus trap, taking the focus back on the trigger when you close, positioning of the box. All of this stuff is handled for you.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it's amazing, man.
Well, thank you for that demo. I want to make sure that we have enough time to answer some people's questions in the chat, because I know there was a few, just scrolling back to really when we started, that I was kind of pausing to answer later. So maybe I'll just kind of scroll through here, try to pick a couple out that we can talk about. I like this one. Will web on the mobile, so will the mobile web, will it ever replace native mobile apps? Are we close to that singularity? What do you think?
I don't know. I don't know. This is more like a PWA thing, right? Like progressive web apps. There, yeah, you build with probably like offline support and all of these things. It's not really something I don't have that much experience building that. But I have seen that Twitter for web is amazing.
Oh, it's so
a lot of people use that instead of the native app. So I'm sure that it's possible.
Yeah. One thing I think is interesting here is like the two trade-offs. Mobile web, you're able to deploy faster because deployments to the web is easy. You don't have to go to the walled gardens of Apple or Google. But then the inverse there is the discoverability piece, which is like these mobile app stores, even though they have some interesting trade-offs with hosting your things there, whether that's taking a cut of payments or whatever it might be, you get so much discoverability from having those marketplaces. So I think there is a huge advantage of that. I don't know that it will ever replace it, but the better we can get the mobile web and the better that we design mobile web first, I think the better off we'll be for those people who don't want to download apps.
Yeah, I agree.
Can you maybe talk about why Stitches instead of something like a styled system or a theme UI?
The main difference between
about they all have trade-offs, and it's not
exactly. And also like I've been part of this ecosystem for many years. The first version of our design system and the first version of modules was built using Styled System. I contributed to Styled System. I've had chats with Brent Jackson. I love it. It's one of the things that really changed how we design with tokens and how we build with tokens. So it's not, when you say set apart, really the reason we built our own is because Styled System relies on a different CSS and JS library. Styled System is a layer on top. So it relies on prop interpolation, which is the first thing we covered in this chat, which is the biggest bottleneck for performance. And it relies on a different, or you have to actually rely on a different CSS in JS. So you have double of the dependencies, bundle sizes, and things happening. And Stitches is a CSS in JS library. It weighs around 5 kilobytes at the moment with the React API. And you get everything the style system gives you. Essentially, you can do the same and more, but you get a slightly different API because style system has this idea of style props, where everything that you do is passing props, whereas we don't have that. And we thought a lot about whether we do this or not. And of course, once you use something for a long time and you try to think about the API and now working with type safety, props clash very easily with attributes. So if you create a prop, say you want to change the color of a box and of an input, color of an input, like color is a valid attribute of an input element, then you have a problem because you try to pass a token and it doesn't know because it expects a number. Or now, right now I don't remember, it's been a few years, but I raised a lot of issues, and it works for a lot of people. But if you're working with TypeScript, if you want better type safety, if you're after something that's a bit more lightweight, these are the differences. And we built that because we needed it. Like I said, we started off with those, and modules needs to be performance.
Mhm.
As a visual editor, you don't want a laggy UI. If you look at Figma, it shows there's a lot of work to make a UI performant, and we needed to build something for ourselves that we thought we might as well make it available to everybody else.
Nice. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Understanding the trade-offs is key there, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you to everybody. Appreciate the comments. Thanks for joining in. Lots of really great comments in here, especially all the people joining from the start too, who have been hanging out throughout the whole time. We really appreciate y'all joining in. Let's see. We got a good question down here at the bottom. Are create CSS variables available on every page?
Yes, they are available everywhere. And the way that usually works, because now I did everything in a code sandbox, it was just one file, right? The convention that we suggest, you can do whatever you want, is you create a file called stitches.config, and that's where you instantiate stitches. That's where you go create CSS, set your tokens, set your conditions, set your utils and your theme, set your global CSS, everything goes there. And then you re-export the styled function from that file, the stitches.config file. And then you can just import from there everywhere you use it, rather than importing from NPM. It needs to be the same instance that you get back from create CSS, because that's what's bound with the tokens.
That makes sense. That makes sense. This one is, I think this one's over my head because I don't know about the history and evolution, but it sounds like Stitches has evolved and how its underlying implementation works. Can you maybe talk about what that evolution has looked like?
Yes. So Stitches, first of all, let me actually say something I forgot, and I should have said this at the beginning. Stitches started off by a side project of Christian Alfoni, which is a developer of Code Sandbox.
Nice.
And when he launched it, he was like learning in public, he was live streaming, and I saw it and I thought, this is almost exactly what I've always wanted. And I got in touch with Christian and I started testing. I think I was one of the first people to use it, and started testing it out, blah, blah, blah. I started chatting to him. We started changing the API, blah, blah. And then this thing happened at Modules that we needed a better solution.
Yeah.
So we talked to Christian and we took over Stitches. So
Nice.
the initial work was done by Christian, and the API was quite different. There was a few things that didn't exist at this point. And one of those things that he had done is that he had implemented it as an atomic generation, meaning you still author your CSS in an object-oriented way, but you generate atomic classes, right, at the end. That was good, and that was performant, but we never really had a true idea of how performant that was, because it's hard to benchmark. It's something that we're doing right now. It's really difficult. So we're kind of going with like the tech behind it. And it was good, and it was actually probably much faster than all the other libraries, also because we didn't have runtime, like no prop interpolation. Problem though was it was very hard to debug. We had lots of specificity issues of whenever a rule was defined once as an atomic rule, it's going to live in a certain place in your style sheet. You don't know where that's going to be. And for these two reasons, and also when Jonathan joined, having so much experience working with CSS, post CSS plugins, we decided to try and see if we could improve the debugging experience and performance and bundle size. And we've done all of those changes. And from the metrics that we have at the moment, we've managed to be even faster than before. We've reduced the bundle size by about 40 to 50%.
Nice.
And we have a better debugging experience. So win all rounds.
That's all. Yeah, I liked how you showed some of that debugging experience, like prefixing, whether it was a variant, and like being able to toggle the classes in the dev tools, just, you know, outputting to CSS variables. I think all these things are super nice and make that debugging process way easier, which is exciting because I know I've fought CSS-in-JS debugging before, so it's cool to see that that's kind of a first-class solution inside of Stitches. I have a fun question. Completely off topic and random, but you moved from London to Barcelona, right?
Yes.
I think that's awesome just because I love both London and Barcelona. They're two cities I really like. And I'm just curious, if you had to pick one piece of London, whether it was the food or the culture or the architecture, and move that to Barcelona, what would you choose? Merge your places you've lived.
Fuck, man, I would choose my friends, man. Because
yeah, just transport them all.
I've been in lockdown, so it's been a bit tough. And I grew up in London. I wasn't born there, but I grew up there. So all my friends are there. And I think that's what I miss the most, man. Like at the moment, we're just here, locked down. So if they can come over, that'll be great.
Yeah, I definitely empathize with that. Being stuck at home all the time, it's been quite the last year. That's for sure.
Yeah. But here we are, and to be honest, I'm happy here. It's a beautiful city. It's really great for our daughter. I feel like we have a better quality of life, a bit better balance, work-life balance. We can go to the beach in 5 minutes. The weather is nicer than London. It rains a lot less.
Yeah.
So you know, I think for now we're happy here. Never know. Happy to move again if we need to.
Yeah, we got some love in the chat.
Opa,
hey. That's really awesome. More people from Poland. Awesome. Well, thank you all for joining so much. This has been a lot of fun. Yeah, I like asking the questions just about where you're at, where you're living, your family too. You said you have a daughter too. How old is she?
She's 2 years and 2 months.
Nice.
Yeah.
Fun time.
And it's cool, man, because I speak English to her, so she's learning to speak English with me, and my partner speaks Catalan to her because we live in Barcelona. The language here is Catalan, right? And now she's starting to speak, and she says a few things in English, a few things in Catalan, and it's a good phase now. I complain a lot though about her on Twitter. People are not honest enough. It's fucking hard.
Oh, that's awesome. So she'll grow up bilingual. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Exactly. Nice. Well, I know it's getting late for you there, so I don't want to take up the rest of your night, but I really, really appreciate you coming on today, showing us all the amazing things that you're working on. That demo was so good. I'm so glad that this will be recorded and put up on YouTube so people can watch. It'd be awesome too if you save that code sandbox, because I bet people would want to check out with that what you demoed live. So I'll put a link to that in the description too. But yeah, thanks everybody for joining. Thanks again for the demo. Super fun. We should do it again sometime.
Yeah, man. Thank you so much, and good luck with the videos. I'm gonna keep watching them. You're doing a great job with the YouTube videos, the live streams, the articles. Amazing, man.
Thank you. I appreciate that. All right. Well, I'll let you get going. Thank you, everybody.